Mike, you could open the cameras if you want. We're just going to do a level test here. First of all, how are your headphones? Too loud, too quiet?
They're fine with me.
Fine with you? Okay. Mike, how about the headphones back there for you? They're fine? Okay. Talking to the mic. Uh-huh. All right, hold on. See, I'm glad we did that.
Yep.
I've got to fix this here. Keep doing this. All right, Mike, go ahead and talk.
Talking right now.
All right. I want you to recite the Gettysburg Address until I tell you to stop. Ready, set, go.
Okay. 4 score and 7 years ago, our fathers brought forth this nation, conceived in liberty.
All right, there you go. That's very good. Now do it more dramatically, please.
All right. 4 score and 7 years
Okay.
ago.
All right, there you go. That's
our
good.
fa-
Thank you.
Jeff Daniels.
All right, and then just go ahead, Alan, talk into yours a little bit.
Yep. Hey, Matt, how you doing?
All right, I'm going to bring your level up there as well.
Should I
Actually, you do the Gettysburg Address into the microphone until I tell you to stop. Ready, set, go.
4 score and 7 years ago, our fathers and mothers brought forth on this continent.
How liberal of you. I'll try it again. Ready? Is that like your normal speaking voice?
Yeah, I would talk.
Okay, pull the mic right up to your mouth. All right, there you go. Now do it again. Set, go.
Our fathers brought forth on this continent a new nation, conceived in liberty and stolen from the Native Americans.
There you go.
And-
Okay.
There you go.
Just joking around.
Woo, that'll win you some support in the
Yeah.
music country. Yeah.
Right. We
I
are.
don't celebrate Columbus Day because he never set foot on the continent.
Because the Italians need a holiday, right?
Okay, we are live.
Woo!
So just keep that in mind.
Well, that
All
was
right.
my next question.
Well, I'm just saying. I mean, the Germans have something. The Irish have something.
Yes, of course. Oh, there you go. Good save. Good save. All right, now I got to just get the feed here.
Should I be able to hear Mike in my headset?
Do you not?
I don't. I hear him over there, but not. in the
Interesting. Let's go to your headset. All right, hold on. And we're going to test it out there. Let's see. Oh, because Mike's Mike is muted for some reason. So now you should be able to hear him. Mike, say something, please.
Hey, yeah. Well, you know,
I can hear you.
Do you
now.
hear him
I'll
now?
try not to be too spicy.
Yeah, don't be spicy, Mike.
No,
Spicy.
No.
Spicy. I'm a hot mic, but not a spicy mic.
There you go.
Good. I got it. That was good.
Yeah, it was something. All right, let's see. It's forming there a bit. Okay. All right, I think we're ready to go. All right, hello everybody watching. How are you? Where's the camera? There's the camera. Hi, how are you? Today we're talking to Alan Thompson, author of In the Shadow of the Round Tops. Let me get that book so I can show it to everybody. This is, as you know, our fall preview season. It's almost over. It'll be over, the 12th. December 12th will be the last show that we will do, that you will see, I think, unless there's some impromptu show that I decide to do. But I'm taking off the rest of December until the new year. And so this is it. We hope you consider becoming a patron, because after the holidays are over, ladies and gentlemen, you're not going to be able to get these free shows until the next fall, basically. And patrons at the first lieutenant level will be able to see these recording sessions live, and they'll get the information long before everybody else does. There's a process, there's a pipeline, and so being a first lieutenant makes all this stuff easier for us to do, and you get the perk of, well, you know it as the minute we know it. The minute we learn the information, you learn it too. Okay, so let's get started with the show. Here we go. Ready? Any questions or anything you have?
No, I'm
All
good.
set to go. All right, here we go. And the mic, you remember, just pop in on the intercom. It's the button on the right, right?
Yep, got you there.
Okay. Let's have a little test right now.
Question.
Oh, perfect. All right, here we go.
From the Gettysburg Museum of History Studios.
You're listening to Addressing Gettysburg.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. And you know what? Hold on one second. The most important thing, I forgot to record it. So let's do that. Let me get over here to this real quick. Make it a stereo recording. There we go. Overview. Hit record. Now we're recording. All right. One more time. Take two.
From the Gettysburg Museum of History Studios.
You're listening to Addressing Gettysburg.
Hello, patrons, and welcome to this episode of Addressing Gettysburg. And today we are talking to Alan R. Thompson, who's the author of a book that came out this year, I believe, correct?
Correct, indeed.
And the book is called In the Shadow of the Round Tops. And famous book reviewer Rich Snyder wrote this review just now in our comment section. He is a first lieutenant, of course, and he's watching this live as it's being recorded. Great book. I really enjoyed Alan's book and style of writing. Lays out the story in a very fact-by-fact account, full of footnotes and great information. That's from Rich Snyder. And Alan, welcome to the show.
Thank you, and thank you, Rich.
I'm going to just show you guys the cover here so that you know what it looks like when you're going in the stores looking. And there's the spine as well, so that you can recognize it when it's on the shelves. I went and I had to get. Now you had sent one, but I couldn't find it. I moved, so it could be misplaced. So I went and I bought one at for the Historian yesterday, and it was the last copy.
Wow.
I got very lucky there. Very lucky.
Take a trip down there. I brought a couple with me.
Oh, well, yeah, they might need some more. Now, it was the last copy on the shelf. They might have had more. I don't know. But anyway, all right. So this book here is a new look at, would you consider it a new look, or would you set out to write when you did this book? Let's start that way.
Yeah, no. Great question. Which is why you have the show. Not me. I actually, I wanted to really do a trilogy, to be honest with you.
Okay.
I said, you know what, it'd be great to write a trilogy, kind of narrative style, just lay out the story, not really uncover any new ground. And I just present it, the whole thing in a trilogy, one book for day one, day two, day three. So I say a great way to start, in a Star Wars fashion would be, let's start in the middle.
Yeah.
So I thought the way I had always heard the battle portrayed was, the day two goes awry because you have this horrible reconnaissance done in the morning. Lee gets the bad information. He has this whole plan based on this poor reconnaissance. Then you have Longstreet and his whole, his whole story. And so why not start where the whole thing goes awry? It's dawn. It's a reconnaissance. It's kind of behind enemy lines. It's a good it's a good place to start a story. It's got some drama and some intrigue and everything. And so let me go to the sources. I kind of knew the general idea, but I didn't really know the whole story. So I went to the basics. I went to Coddington, Sears, Fonz, everybody, and I went to their footnotes and I said, where are they getting their story? And then I went to those places and I got the letters and the documents, and I said, this doesn't quite match up with the assumptions that people have made. I found a lot of, which you see it a lot in history, especially with the synthesized, single volume works.
Yeah.
By necessity, you can't out to every regiment and if you're going to do a book in somebody's lifetime, you're going to have to do some synthesizing. And something like this, which is, there's not much out there, why not? But I started tracing it back and back and back, and I said, these assumptions all go back to really one place, and the assumptions build on each other. And so you got this, we're not quite sure what happened. Maybe there was some miscommunication if you go back to Douglas Freeman, to the modern Stephen Sears type approach, which is Johnston totally screwed up and went to the wrong place and didn't see the right thing and almost basically, I think he says, I'd have to go back and I don't want to quote him, but I think he says he lies, that he just made this thing up to save his own reputation. And I started reading the letters that he wrote, and then what McLaws wrote, that these are all responses to things. So that's kind of what started the whole thing, is these assumptions didn't add up, and I started digging into that, really for this opening of the narrative I wanted to write, and that just, I saw how this thing just kind of started unfolding and spreading, and rabbit hole after rabbit hole popped up, and just started to go down those rabbit holes, and that popped out of it.
So we a couple of weeks ago did a show for the 60th anniversary of JFK's assassination. Just little, every once in a while it's nice to step out of Gettysburg and do something else.
Yeah, it's fun.
I also figured it would get a lot of clicks. But so I've been still kind of watching or listening to lectures and things about the assassination, because of course I'm the Oswald did it guy.
Okay.
Now I used to be a conspiracy theorist, but then I said, let me read the other side. And I noticed a stark difference. Do you know what the difference is between the two sides?
What's that?
When you read...
I'm not an I know the basic story, but I'm
right.
not by
The stark difference is the pro-Oswald side has evidence, whereas the conspiracy side misrepresents the evidence,
right,
and then raises an eyebrow and goes, "Moo," and then poses some question like, "Why would someone who blah blah blah?" Knowing full well that the audience has never been an assassin, so they have no idea how you would react in that situation. Yeah. Okay. So anyway, my point is,
right.
Reading this book, In the Shadow of the Round Tops, for preparation last night, I was feeling kind of like, oh, this is kind of like the reconnaissance and the countermarch have been a mystery for a lot of Gettysburg buffs.
Yeah.
I mean, we know some stuff, but as you point out, I think you say that really, we don't have a lot of firsthand accounts of that whole thing.
Right.
We have a few to go off of.
And most of those, excuse me, except for a couple reports, most of those are once there's a controversy about it. And so even those first hand accounts that we got to be suspicious of them
because they're in response to a controversy. What you're saying.
And everybody's going to be defensive and put themselves in the best light when all eyes are on them.
Do we have anything from prior to the first controversy?
You have Kershaw's report.
Okay.
You have one regimental report, Robert Maffitt's account, and neither one of those are incredibly detailed, but you can kind of use those as a baseline.
Okay.
To kind of compare and contrast other things. In all of them, you have to have a healthy dose of skepticism because is Kershaw hiding? Not hiding, but is he making himself, even his report, look the best he can?
Well, what does he say?
He basically just says that we got to the base of the hill, and
meaning Little Round Top,
or I call it McLaw's Hill in the book. That troublesome hill is what I think Fonz calls it, but it's right when you cross over the Fairfield Pike on Black Horse Tavern Road.
Oh,
there's that
like
rise.
Breams Hill. Is that?
Yeah, like the southern ridge of Breams Hill. So
like across from Black Horse Tavern.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So they're on the road. So if you're on that road, the Black Horse Tavern Road, you cross over the pike.
Mm-hmm.
Breams Hill looms to your left.
Yes.
And we're talking that ridge. So they never really go over the top of Breams Hill.
Gotcha.
That's not the hill that they're talking about. They're using that as cover. They're walking around it.
Okay.
To conceal themselves from the Federal Army.
Yeah, they're not on top of it waving.
Right. And then they get to this other ridge, and that's supposedly where they stop, and they turn around. So Kershaw's not actually on the ridge. They're a few hundred yards back. So they're basically at the intersection.
Okay.
Just for reference, they're not really on top of the hill. McLaw's is on top of the hill, supposedly with Johnston. That's the standard story is he's on with Johnston, and they get to this crest and they realize, oh wow, we can be seen, and so we got to turn around. So Kershaw confirms the fact that they stop and they have to turn around, and that they're trying to use the hills and the woods as concealment. That's pretty much all he says about that. He doesn't say anything about the reconnaissance.
Okay. So I guess the reason I started with the JFK thing, I didn't finish my point there, was that when I first read a pro-Oswald book, it had many, many details about Oswald that day and for basically his entire life leading up to that day. Now, you don't go into the entire life. There's a short biography of Johnston, right. but that's not, you're not doing like a
right.
biography about it. But my point is that it opened my eyes to things that I had never heard when I was consuming conspiracy stuff, right? Because it kind of refutes the conspiracy stuff, right? So, but it opened my eyes to and I saw it in a whole new light. And one of the things from your book that gave me that kind of moment was Johnston starts his reconnaissance 4-ish.
He leaves headquarters 4:30.
Well, that's okay. Yeah. So, but the story, because we've done shows with guides. I think we've done 2 shows with guides about the reconnaissance and or the countermarch, right?
Yeah.
But usually the two kind of overlap.
They do, yeah.
And so 4:00 is the best time, the guides have put it at, right?
Right. And that comes right from Johnston. So there's evidence for that. They're not making it up.
Sure. No, of course.
Yeah.
But it comes from Johnston because he said, I left headquarters at 4.
Right.
So we assume he got right down to business.
Right.
But you point out from other accounts that he doesn't get right down to business. He makes a couple of stops along the way. Tell us what happened. He leaves headquarters. What do we know so far? Or what do we know after he leaves headquarters? What does he do?
Sure. So just to start with the 4:00, like I said, that does come from Johnston directly.
Right.
But that is also hedged. Again, that's taken from one letter, and there's 2 letters. There's a February 11th and a February 16th. And he's writing to Fitzhugh Lee, who's preparing his own paper to kind of refute Longstreet.
Okay.
And so this
is what year?
I want to say 77, 78.
Long after the battle.
Yeah, 78 actually is when it is. It's Longstreet's a 77, but the refutation is in 78.
Okay.
And both of these are in the Southern Historical Society. The actual finished product of Fitzhugh Lee and Longstreet's are both in the Southern Historical Society. So you go out and look at them yourself. But this is kind of the creation, how Fitz Lee is going and creating his counter argument. So he reaches out to Johnston. Johnston says, I left early in the morning on my reconnaissance. And Fitz Lee said, what time? What time did you leave? He's like, I don't know. That's why I didn't tell you. It's like, if I had to guess, 4, maybe. He said, I didn't have a watch. I wasn't paying attention to it, even if I did have a watch. Let's call it 4. It was around dawn. So that's where the 4 comes from, is he kind of says, I don't know, 4. And so that's a solid number. We go with that. So
Okay.
Ballpark, sure. But is it 4? Is it 3:45?
Or, yeah.
4:30. Is it 5 for all we know?
Right.
But it's so that's the 4:00. But what he does, to answer your question, was they leave headquarters. He probably rides south from Lee's headquarters to Hill's headquarters.
Okay.
And there's the very condensed version of why he does that is Ewell has given a message to Lee around 4:00 that Ewell is not in the position he thought he was going to be in. Lee is expecting Johnson, without the T, old Allegheny, as to be on Culp's Hill. That's the plan on the night of July 1st. Johnson obviously isn't. Ewell has to report that somehow. Lee gets that message. He then sends word down to Hill because the original plan is to have a pincer movement against Cemetery Hill, from Hill on the one side and Ewell on the other. And so that's obviously not happening at this point. So he's got to now tell Hill. So he sends, there's an account by Armistead Long, who's his military secretary. And they all have these different staff titles, but they're all doing the same type of stuff. Yeah. So Armistead Long also has an account in the Southern Historical Society papers. And he says, I rode south around dawn to Hill's headquarters. I got there about sunrise. Well, then you can take Pendleton's account and Johnston's account, and they're together doing reconnaissance work on Seminary Ridge, which is about 500, 600, 700 yards, where however you want to place it, Hill's exact headquarters from Hill's headquarters. Mm-hmm. So you can take a couple of, and those are just a couple. There's Walker, the artillery chief, he's got accounts as well. So you take all of these accounts about what they're doing and you throw them on the table for that time period and you say, oh, wow, these all kind of match up. They're all doing the same thing. One of Pendleton's aides, Coupland Page, he says basically the same thing. I was placing artillery down there early in the morning. Pendleton was kind of there and doing his own thing. Pendleton in his report talks about doing a survey of the area. Johnston uses the word reconnaissance. Pendleton uses the word survey. It's, we don't have to have the exact match. We're all talking about the same thing.
Right.
And Johnston also is not really considering that preliminary thing. I mean, he's the recon guy. Like if you follow Johnston, he's been the recon guy, mm-hmm. and he still becomes the recon guy after this. So he's the guy to do this.
So he's done this it's not his first time.
No.
Right. So he's done it for like Longstreet, Jackson, Stewart.
Yeah,
he's experienced in this.
He's recommended by Stewart to Lee. That's how he ends up on Lee's staff.
There you go. Okay. Yes, Michael. Sorry, yeah, go ahead.
Okay. So looking at Johnston's career as a reconnaissance officer, did Robert E. Lee kind of fulfill that type of role in the Mexican-American War for Winfield Scott?
Yeah, and actually Johnston references Lee's service with Scott in one of his letters. I think it's the first one, but I could be wrong on that off the cuff. But he does mention, actually, no, it's to McLaws, the 1892 letter, I think. He says, I didn't have 200 men, because McLaws thinks that he has got 200 cavalrymen with him, or excuse me, infantrymen with him. I think he confuses it with cavalrymen later on, which I just did. So there you go.
So it's very easy to do.
and then we're only talking, a couple of months where he had, 30 years. So
right.
But so McLaws remembers giving 200 men to Johnston to go do the reconnaissance, and Johnston said, I don't know, maybe give them to somebody, but it wasn't to me. He's like, I found, Lee had told me that his experiences in Mexico, it was actually easier to go with one person or just a couple of people to stay concealed. And you got better intelligence, you get closer. And that's been his MO. The couple of other recons he does talk about, or he's mentioned in other places, that's the MO. Just take one or two people with you.
So McLaws and you say that McLaws and Alexander kind of rise above the fray and all this stuff. Why? Why do they?
So their two accounts are probably the most well-respected and the most cited, I would say, because they seem unbiased.
Okay. I
don't come to the conclusion they are, and that's not a bad thing. It's not a criticism. None of this is a criticism of anybody. We're all people. We all act we all on the same way.
Sure.
So we're all using the same hardware up here. But Alexander especially gets this reputation of being a great analyst and above the fray.
He seems to be everywhere too.
He does. He's not always everywhere, but he seems to be.
He seems to be, yeah.
Dennis Fry's got a good point in his Antietam Shadows book, where and for a long time on the placard at the National Park Service, they had a quote from him about the sunken lane and about the artillery and how he wasn't there. So he's but he's got this very analytical style. He's critical of Lee fairly, and but he's also a Confederate, one of the most well-known Confederate. He's apparently, I'm not an expert on Alexander prior to the war, but from what I've read, he's a pretty ardent secessionist before the war. But he's a math professor. He's a diplomat. He goes to Panama. They try to recruit him and some other Confederate generals to serve in the Egyptian army in a coup. So this guy's everywhere. He's a really interesting guy. But then he writes, these really unbiased looks, at the Confederate Army. And he's got, the stamp of approval from Gary Gallagher in the 80s. I mean, that goes a long way too.
It does.
It's, for good reason. I mean, Gary Gallagher's in a lot of great work. So, but he is a human. McLaws is a human. McLaws has these speeches. McLaws is a really easy guy to like. He's calm, he's collected, he's pretty steady, which is one of the reasons that Lee doesn't really like him. He's not this cavalier, he's not bold and coming up with new ideas and taking big chances, which if you look at who becomes, the icons of the Confederacy and the Army of Northern Virginia.
It's those guys.
You have your Jacksons, you have your, Stewart and Lee, and those are the guys that make it.
They also are the ones who don't make it to the end of the war.
Exactly. And, I've said it, and I'm not the only one to have ever said it, but if Longstreet had actually succumbed to his wound in the wilderness, I think he'd be up there too.
Sure.
But, and he's not bold and daring and dashing, but he is
brave.
He's
brave.
He's always in the front. He's, that line from Gettysburg about being out in front, that's true.
And lead from behind.
Exactly. It's, but so McLaws and Alexander are very steady. They appear to have unbiased accounts. And I think even above that is they're detailed. You have, like you said earlier, you have this big hole in the historical record, this mystery. You got somebody that's going to fill that with details, that's who you're going
Sure.
with. I mean, that's history. You got to have accounts.
And did I ask you when they wrote their accounts?
Yeah, so Alexander's accounts, they both write a lot frequently. And so Alexander writes, I'd say mostly in the mid-1870s about it, but then he's got his big manuscript in the early 1900s.
Okay.
And then the one Gallagher published in the 80s was more of a personal manuscript memoir.
Yeah.
But that's not published until, that's in an archive until the 80s. So none of the people we're concerned about in this controversy know that.
Yeah, sure.
And McLaws writes in his big public accounts are 78, 88, and 95 or something.
So neither of these, we're getting none of this information from these guys from post-battle reports that they submitted. These are...
Alexander writes a report, which is actually fairly different than things he says later. And he actually writes 2 reports. One just kind of off the cuff, and then one after he's gotten some of his battery commanders writing their reports.
Okay.
So his times and places change a little bit, as you would expect, as you're getting more information. And one of the reports is in the Historical Society papers, and the other one is in the official records. So the first one's in the official records, the second one's in the Southern Historical Society papers.
So you mentioned, that your information might change as you're getting more information coming in, your reports from your battery commanders and things like that. What is your background?
I was a history and political science major in undergrad, and then I went to law school. I'm an attorney now.
So you're an attorney?
Yeah.
So
don't hold that against me.
But the reason I wanted to point that out was because attorneys have to sift through a lot of information. I mean, if you're, doing like a trial or something like that, or I guess really anything where there's some kind of contention, right?
But definitely a trial. And that, right out of law school, I did trial and appellate work.
Okay. So you have in your wheelhouse. So I can't imagine the stresses of being a commander, and you've got to, give orders, you've got to receive orders and carry them out and all this stuff. And then when the action is over, you're getting all this information coming in. Of course, you have a staff that's helping you and everything, but you still have to know what happened because you've got to write your report. And
some of your staff might have been killed.
Right.
One, that's one less person to do it. If you ever had a staff that's, quit on you and you're going, I got to do this myself. You got that. Plus you're retreating, and also that person who might have been killed has the information that he had.
Right.
So you don't have that information. That's gone too.
It's like, it's got to be exhausting.
I can't imagine.
Well, I mean, you can because you've done trials. Well, so, I mean, what I'm saying is like all that information, all the other stuff you can't imagine. But
that's what I'm saying. I can't imagine being in that, here's somebody that's just been through a battle. I mean, I'm sitting at a desk,
right.
It's just, and they're riding on horseback through the pouring rain, trying to fight off, rear guard actions and things. And it's a little bit more stressful.
So, I mean, you take the stress and confusion of just taking all this information. What do I include? What's reliable? What's not reliable? Does it check out with other pieces of information I have about that specific thing? And that's got to be stressful on its own. Now add to it the stresses of war. And I mean, it's got to be insane, the whole thing. So, but you obviously that has helped you with this research because it's
right
now. Granted, I didn't read the whole book yet because I don't have time to read whole books anymore because I interview too many authors. But from what I'm gathering from just what I read and looking at the list of chapters and stuff, it feels like you're laying out a case in some kind of way. Is that what you're trying to do? Are you trying to lay out a case for what? If you are,
to an extent, where I would say. And I don't know if it's a criticism. I've heard it portrayed as criticism, but I think most lawyers that are also authors are going to lay out that case based on, okay, this is what I think happened. Let me prove it, because that's what we get. We get a client. We got to defend or prosecute whatever our side is.
Mm-hmm.
This, I took the same approach as far as let's lay everything on the table, but I really didn't know what happened. I didn't have a theory when I started. I said, what is going on? And so it is building a case to a degree, but it's not a preconceived case where I'm trying to find everything to fit what I wanted. Because I wrote in the introduction that most of this time, I had no idea what was going on.
Yeah.
I was just finding new information and putting it into an outline and trying to figure out how it all fit together. And a lot of times I couldn't, which is eventually one day it just kind of clicked. It said, not all of this is right, not all of it's wrong.
Right.
So I don't have to take McLaws's account and say everything of this is bunk.
Right.
And I don't have to take Alexander and say this guy's right, or say I agree with Johnston. And at the very beginning, I was kind of pro Johnston. I was like, I wrote an article first for Gettysburg Magazine,
right.
and that was probably a little bit more pro Johnston. And I call it a defense of Samuel Johnston. So that was very much more of that lawyer case. Looking at the whole picture for the book, it was much more of like I said, I just want to know what happened because it was driving me crazy.
Yeah. It drives us all crazy.
Yeah. And I'm looking at the map, I'm looking at Warren's map, and I'm looking at, the Batchelder troop movement maps and the isometric. I'm like, where did they go and what did they do and what did they, like, how this doesn't fit, So, and that goes back to your initial question about McLaws and Alexander and why are they taken. They tend to mesh together and they don't contradict each other.
Okay.
Until you really start getting into the nitty gritty details, because McLaws will contradict himself and Alexander does contradict himself. But the basic picture, which is what most of the time we're looking for, because a lot of this has just come up as like a couple paragraphs to fill the gaps. It hasn't really been looked at this. Yeah.
Yeah, Mike.
Yeah, I have a question about that and memory. Human memory.
This is question number 2, by the way.
One of the things that you point out is that they're running these things in the 1870s, 1880s, and 1890s. What role does memory play, human memory play, in these accounts? And more importantly, how do the memories of others influence the memories of an individual?
That's I think that's A and B just for when you're counting. No, but it's a great
2A
point.
And 2B.
And actually, that's the first part of the intro kind of sets that stage because that's a huge part of my interpretation. Is I started looking at these and I realized that you had conflicting accounts and only one thing happened. There's only one event that happened. You didn't have two conflicting events happen on the morning of July 2nd.
Mm.
You had conflicting accounts, but one or the other, or more likely a combination of the two, actually happened. So what you ended up with is you had these series of the analogy I like to use is is if you remember, if you're a dad or you ever had a dad, and it's like the police lights go on out in the neighborhood. It's what's going on? I gotta know what's going on. So you go to one window and you look out and you say, okay, well, I can see a little bit of it. Let me go to the other side of that. So each window offers a different view.
Yeah, okay.
And I kind of took that approach with the accounts. As I'm getting this version, this guy is seeing it at this point. And then you add the memory part in there, which Mike just pointed out, is one, time is going to fade memory no matter what. There's a lot of scientific points to that and a lot of scientific research done to that. And that's a big part of trial work is eyewitnesses. And Elizabeth Loftus is a great source if you want something that's easy to read and understand, but also understand the science behind people viewing things differently. She does a lot of work for like defense attorneys and eyewitness accounts.
Yeah.
She's been doing it for decades. So her books are great on that, and their research articles, but everybody sees things differently. And then we're very susceptible to our memory being changed. And so they've done, we could spend a whole show on this, so I won't. But just one example is they did which was helpful for me, is a post-Gulf War, Persian Gulf War in the early 90s.
Yeah.
Within 30 days of deployment, a combat deployment, they limited to combat troops. They asked a series of questions. Did you see this? Did you do this? Did you see, hear about this? All of these questions. And they took their answer. And then 2 years later, they brought them all back. And they asked them the same questions. And they found that the specific numbers are in the book. But roughly 2/3 of those answers have changed in those 2 years.
With more detail or retracting or
varying,
both?
Depending, yeah. And the main point is that they changed.
Yeah.
And some of them went from I didn't experience this, even though I said I did. Some of it was they said I didn't, and then later on they said I did. But the overarching thing seemed to be that the answers were relatively what you would expect. I've never been in combat. I have a lot of, obviously respect for people who have, and, but, I haven't been in the Civil War either, and I'm writing about it. So it's, there's that little separation. So I'm only going off of what these people are reporting.
Right.
But they said that what you would expect from a post-combat deployment, war is awful. You saw terrible things, we don't have to get into the nitty-gritty details, but just what you would expect a combat soldier to have reported in any war. 2 years later, after this, basically 2 years of reporting that what a victory we had, it was a bloodless war, we only, quote unquote, only lost a couple hundred troops. Now that bleeds into people's own memories, and they say, well, they're not sitting consciously saying, oh, I must not have seen that. But that bleeds in and it meshes with their memory. And so the memory is not like this file cabinet that we like to think of. It's basically just a big bucket. Stuff gets thrown in.
Yeah.
And
it's like that drawer everybody has in the kitchen where you just throw random things. Yeah.
It's not the card catalog that we usually think, file cabinet. Right. Oh, let me go to, Gettysburg, 1863, 9:30 a.m. That's what happened.
That's what I did.
Crystal clear memory. You have, here's my whole life. It's that picture box that you have.
Yeah.
And you pull it out. And if somebody else, if you've been talking about it, JR meetings, reading articles, newspaper accounts, just regular veterans associations groups. You're all sharing war stories and just general memories together. Reading other regimental reports, reading accounts. These people were interested. This is a big part of their lives.
Sure.
So they were interested. A lot of them kept it. And especially the most important part is the people that were interested and stayed up with this are the ones that wrote about it.
Yeah.
If you're not interested in it at all, you're not going to write about it, so you don't become a source. So that's part of creating history as well. But all of those memories and conversations get thrown into that bucket too. And so when you pull it out, it all sticks together. So you have this conglomeration of memories. Did I remember that? Did he remember that? And one of the things that was surprising to me is that that whole signal flag, we saw those flags waving and that stopped the whole army and we turned around. You can actually, when you lay out the accounts in chronological order and who said what when, excuse me, you really see the creation of that story. And it's not nobody sat down and said, okay, signal flag, we're going to create this story. That's just an easy way to say it. But you have, okay, we could be seen. So we stopped. And then somebody else remembers, oh, yeah, there were signal flags somewhere. Okay, well, if he saw signal flags, now it gets dropped into the story. And then the next person writing about it talks about signal flag. And then it becomes the narrative, and that becomes a part of the story. But that's not quite there were flags up there in their way, but that's not quite what stopped the whole column and turned them around. That's a story that in the first accounts, you don't hear anything about it from the people on that part of the field.
Do you think that they actually did see and then remembered later, or do you think that they didn't see and then read in the ORs that were these coming out after the ORs?
Yeah. So
they would have read in the ORs that there was a signal station up there.
Yeah, and not even so much in the ORs. A lot of it's the accounts later.
Okay.
And so the brief buildup here is you have really nothing about it on Kershaw or Maffitt in the ORs. They just stop and they turn around because they're not really in a position to see what's on the other side of the hill or what McLaws. They stop, they turn around, they countermarch. The first place you see that they stop because they're going to be seen is McLaws. He writes an 1873 letter to Longstreet. And in there, he says, we stopped because we could be seen by the enemy. And then Alexander talks about seeing signal flags, but Alexander is up on Seminary Ridge with Pendleton. And so Kershaw then writes about it, and he says, yeah, we stopped because of the signal flags, because he's reading Alexander and his papers on it. He doesn't know why we stopped. McLaws doesn't tell him. Oh, well, it must have been those signal flags. So I don't know why we stopped. He says we stopped because the signal flags caused that. Must have been that. And so then McLaws starts putting signal flags into his because that's just, again, these memories are just building off of each other. And then that becomes a standard part of the story. But curiously enough, if you go back to Longstreet's account, he never says the initial reason for the stop was signal flags. And McLaws doesn't either, because Longstreet's going off of McLaws' story, the 1873 letter. And so he never gets the signal flag story, or at least as quickly as anybody else. He mentions being seen, but there's a second stop. So when you're reading Longstreet's accounts of everything, specifically in the Annals of the War, the 1877 account, which kind of sparks all of this, the signal flags are the signal flags come up in the responses to Longstreet's 1877 account. And so when he writes about it, he doesn't mention it because it hasn't come out yet, because McLaws didn't mention it to him in 1873.
Okay.
And so Longstreet says, when you kind of pick this apart, there's actually two stops that Longstreet talks about. There's an initial stop and they turn around, and then there's another stop. And that's where McLaws, if you read McLaws, he'll say, well, Longstreet was just bullheaded and said, I don't care if we've been seen. We've already been seen. Just keep going. Well, that doesn't fit if you stop and turn around, because now you're not stopping. You're not going to keep going. So that can't have happened where they say it happened.
Yeah.
Or at least they don't match up. So Longstreet's his second stop had to have been somewhere later down the road. And again, he doesn't say signal flag. He just said we could be seen, which is what McLaws says to him initially. And so that's kind of how that signal flag story builds up. Is one person says they stopped, another person on a different part of the field remembers signal flags, and then they just say, well, that must have been why we stopped. And then this person says, okay, well, the story, this is the story, and so I'm going to add to the story what I know, and they keep the part that they don't know, which is the signal flags, and it just starts to build and build and build and build.
So what is the signal station saying about this? Do they see Longstreet's column ever?
Yes, but not where the Confederates think they're seen.
Huh.
So and this is going on the record we have. Are there reports out there that we just haven't found yet? If that comes in, well, then that you got to find out where it fits into all this.
Sure,
but
yeah.
What we have, the only account we have from the signal station where they talk about seeing Confederate troops. So there's actually two. One, my assumption is they see Anderson moving into position. The Pitzer's Wood fight, the Berdan sharpshooters in the 3rd Maine, and there's some cavalry involved there too, a couple squadrons, and so they see that. At least that's how I interpret it. I've heard some other account. Again, it's they don't say Pitzer's Woods stop whatever on the auto tour. This is where they were. They say woods about this far out. And again, with anything with time and distance measurements, they're not out there with laser sights and synchronized watches. So it seems to fit the time and the location seems to fit Pitzer's Woods. And so they see them, skirmishers pushing our troops back, and they can see the 3rd Maine and the Berdan's guys running backwards. And it's around noon, which is mostly where that we think that probably happened. There's accounts from the Confederates where that happened at like 7:30 in the morning. But most of the accounts put that around noon. And so that seems to, and then the other one they see is about 1:30 or so. They see a heavy column of troops. They estimate about 10,000 moving northeast, the total opposite direction of the march. So I think what they see is they see a portion of the tail end, really, of the counter march coming back through Hares Ridge and onto Willoughby Run Road, essentially.
Now, how about the signal station on Jack's Mountain? Are they seeing any of this, and are they reporting anything?
No, I don't. They come into play as far as figuring out how the whole signal station operation is working. And it kind of gives a pretty good account that, for reasons that are explainable, but it's not a really tightly run organization that day or during the battle.
Jack's Mountain.
Or the whole signal corps.
The whole signal corps, okay.
Yeah,
gotcha.
There's a lot of moving around and miscommunications amongst people. A lot of that has to do with...
Yes, Michael, go ahead.
All right, going back to the Pitzers, well, we'll continue on the whole Jack's Mountain thing, but the Pitzers Wood fight. Recently we've covered how the Union responded, specifically Daniel Sickles. How did the Confederates respond during this march to the Pitzers Wood fight?
Sure, and that's as usual. That's a good question. I'll answer the one thing I was just saying about the Signal Corps real quick was the commander of the Signal Corps had actually been captured about a week before during the campaign. Okay. So you have this, I think he was a captain, Lemuel Norton, not Oliver Norton who wrote the Attack and Defense of Little Round Top, but a different Norton.
Okay,
he's I think a captain, maybe a lieutenant. Sorry if I got his rank wrong, but and he's just kind of taken over this on the fly.
Okay,
and so he's not Meade, who's this career soldier who knows kind of what he's doing, taking over. He's just this, this line officer essentially. And he's like, okay, now I command the entire Army of the Potomac Signal Corps, and they're all over the place, and I don't really know exactly what's going on. So I give him a lot of leeway on that, but it's not really run real tightly.
Okay.
So each station is kind of doing its own thing. The closer you get to headquarters, the more, consolidated command is. But Jack's Mountain is way out there. But to answer Mike's question, the Confederates, to me, I don't know how far you got through the book yet, Mike, but to me,
sure, he finished it. Did you finish it, Mike? Yeah, he finished it.
Okay. So to me, the Pitzer's Wood fight is what causes the countermarch.
Okay.
So that kind of takes the place in the developments that my interpretation of the role the signal flags played.
Okay.
So they get to what I call McLaws Hill, that spur of Breams Hill. And when you get up there, almost directly in front of you, a little bit to the left, but almost directly in front of you. And the way the road is designed on the map, the road curves off to the left.
Mm-hmm.
Pitzer's Woods is essentially where McLaws is supposed to be. Like, that's his destination.
Right.
I mean, that's, he's got, there's 10,000 troops there, almost 7,000 troops. They're not taking up 5 feet of space. So that's in the sector that he's supposed to be. Well, now you have this big skirmish. I mean, Pendleton's on the other side of Seminary Ridge, and he calls it a sharp firefight, and they actually got a little bit nervous. And you read the Alabama accounts, and you read the Berdan's accounts, and the Maine account. It's a big thing. Moses Lakeman talks about leaving something like 40-something guys in Pitzer's Woods. That's a big fight.
Yeah.
And so you see this from McLaws Hill, and that's something to make you stop in your tracks and think about what I'm going to do now. And to me, that's what causes the countermarch. So you get to the top of the hill. Here's all this fighting going on, exactly where you're supposed to be. Not only that, but you have cavalry squadrons darting back and forth across the field that you're supposed to march through.
Mm-hmm.
If you continue forward, maybe you can fight them off. I don't think they're worried about getting slaughtered.
Right.
But the point is to get there without being seen.
Right.
And you can't get there without being seen by marching right through a big firefight with the enemy skirmishers. And they're more than skirmishers at that point. But if you're worried about skirmishers and a signal station, you're definitely worried about an infantry regiment, a sharpshooter position, and squadrons of cavalry.
Sure.
So you say, so what do we do? And so that's what starts that whole, okay, let's go find out. They go get Longstreet. They talk with Longstreet. And in the book, I talk about they actually go to get Pendleton. You can't say that after the war because Pendleton's one of the two guys that's criticizing you. So you can't say, oh, yeah, we went to ask Pendleton for help.
Right, because the people will turn to him. Yeah.
But if you start getting into the diaries, they do. Fairly closely after the battle, George, it's undated, but George Peterkin, he's a pretty prominent guy, and his dad's a prominent guy in the social circles at the time. Their names don't really live on into history, but they're prominent. Peterkin's one of the guys that gives one of the eulogies for Lee at some point. I mean, these are the top guys in the social circle.
They're up there, and
he's got a diary, and it's mentioned twice. one much farther on and one much closer to the time period, and in a handwritten letter versus a printed story decades later.
Mm-hmm.
And he says that I was ordered, he's George Peterkin's a lieutenant, and he's on Pendleton's staff. I was ordered to meet McLaws and guide him into position down the Ravine Road, which is the Willoughby Run Road.
Okay.
So, and when you place this is at that time. And so all evidence, at least that we have, indicates that they stop, they see this firefight, they stop. Longstreet comes down to see why the heck did we stop and what's going on. James, there's a kind of a battle going on right where you want me to get to unseen. What do you want me to do?
Right.
Well, Longstreet's, somewhat famous line is, well, this won't do. Understatement of the year.
Yeah, right.
Like, oh, shoot, what shall we do? Let's go find out. So they go over to Pendleton, who has done part of the reconnaissance as well, which is another part of the story that often, not always, but often gets overlooked. Is that Pendleton does a reconnaissance too, and part of his reconnaissance is with Johnston. And so Johnston is actually, in my opinion, not part of this little meeting. McLaws places him there, but that's a whole conversation in itself.
Meeting between
Lee or Longstreet and McLaws, and turning around in the counter.
Got it.
If you read McLaws' account, he says, me and Johnston ran all over the place looking for a different route, and then we got Longstreet, and we decided, and but I don't think Johnston's there. I think he's honestly getting himself confused. I don't think he's lying, but there's no evidence other than McLaws saying that Johnston's there.
Johnston doesn't put himself there.
No, Johnston is over. I place him closer to the McPherson farm. Not on the McPherson, but in that area. And that's
Oh, you're talking in the morning.
No, at the countermarch time when they decide to countermarch. Johnston is not. I don't think Johnston's leading the countermarch or the initial march, much less the countermarch. I don't think he's there. There's a big part in not a huge part, but a section of the book where we go into McLaws' memory about who his engineer was and his guide, and I think he just gets himself mixed up.
Okay.
But so they go over, they get help. They say, what are we going to do? We have this battle going. They go to get help. They go to Pendleton, which again you can't really say. Pendleton's aide says, okay, we all know this route that Anderson took. And Wilcox just had this firefight. So you can take that road. They're going to obviously push those guys back. They're already pushing them back. Take the road that Anderson went down, and that's the Willoughby Run Road. And so, well, how do we get there? Oh, we got to countermarch. So that's where that whole we have to countermarch comes in. I don't think McLaws' account indicates that he's the one that discovered this road early in the morning by doing this reconnaissance that Longstreet said, don't do it, but I did it anyways. Everybody knew at that point about the Willoughby Run Road. And we know that is because everybody on Seminary Ridge went down that way. So it's not a secret road that McLaws knows about. But again, he can't say that Peterkin and Pendleton are the one that told him because they're the ones that are on the other side. They're the accusers. And so they turn around, they march back to basically where they started from. They cross over Harris Ridge. There's a couple of farm lanes through the road. And McLaws talks about how the roads were narrow and they had to kind of double everybody up at certain points.
Right.
And that's kind of a rough terrain. And then finally we hit the road. Well, they do hit the road. They hit a bigger road at that point. And so that's how that whole the Pitzer's Woods Burdans fight, that's how that plays in. I think the signal flags are there, but I think it gets into the memory because one, other people saw them and put them in, but I think McLaws probably did see them. If you're stopped on the hill and you see the fight, you pull out the eyeglass and you start looking around, and at that point now you can see signal flags.
Okay.
But the eye cannot detect that sort of shape at the distance. The naked eye can't.
Right. Too small.
It is.
Yeah.
You can detect light. So, and that's what's interesting to me anyways about that is a lot of the experiments that have been done on that are done at night, and people will take a flashlight and they'll point, okay, well, can you see the light? Yeah. Okay. Well, you could have seen the signal station. but you can't because the eye can pick up light sources at that distance, but it can't pick out distinct shapes.
Well, especially in darkness.
Right.
I mean, the broad daylight, you see everything. Yeah. There was actually, I think it was 2018 during the anniversary, the Park Service did this cool thing at night. They had a signal station at Meade's headquarters and a signal station up on Little Round Top. And they waited till dark, and they communicated with lanterns, because that's at night, that's what they would have done it. And I was very surprised, A, that I could see the light on Little Round Top, but also how very tiny it was. Like, you could see it, but it was very tiny. And that was to the naked eye.
Right.
Easily missable if you're not looking.
If you know where it is.
Yeah,
too.
if you know, right. We were looking for it.
Right.
So, yeah. And now, but still, it's once you know where it is, as tiny as it is, it's easy to see because it's dark.
Right.
But in the middle of the day, broad daylight.
Yep.
I mean, I don't know.
Horseback too. Even if you're a great horseback rider, there's still a little bit of motion. Even in the car, there's some motion. So you're not going to be able to, and just scientifically, there's equations that can be done. I'm not a math person, but you can't see it. That doesn't, 20/20 vision. You're not going to see that with a naked eye.
That was the other thing I was going to say is, like, how many guys had 20/20 vision who, like, there's just so many things that. Right. How about yes. Well, here's one thing that would maybe go in the favor of them seeing it or being able to see it is you can see the heights.
Right.
So that would be a good place to put a signal station. So maybe you can go looking for it.
Well, and I think that's closer to what happened.
Yeah.
I think they're stopped and my point is not that it wasn't there or they never saw it. My point is that does not stop you in your tracks.
Right.
If you're riding on horseback and you're looking around, you're going to see a skirmish happening right in front of you, and then you can stop, and that's really what dictates the decision to me. I think he then takes out the glass and he starts looking around, and like you said, there's a hill. He looks up there. Now I can see some signal flags. So that way, when other people bring it up, it's not like, oh, I must have missed that. Let me put it in my story. It's already there.
Right.
It's just not.
It's not the pressing
in his original story until somebody else brings it up. And so, again, because you can place a signal station at the time. They were obviously there at various parts of the day. I don't think it was a continual presence on the hill. It could have been, but I don't think it is. Again, it's just not something you see from that distance. Because I think you're like 2, almost 3 miles from this at McLaws Hill.
Right.
So you're quite a ways away.
But I always wondered this too. It's like you're moving a core, 2/3 of a core. I mean, what really are your reasonable expectations of not being detected? I mean, let's say you find terrain that completely conceals the bodies and the artillery and the wagons. Okay. But these aren't paved roads. These are dirt roads. So you're going to kick up dust.
Oh, yeah.
Right? They're going to see a dust cloud. And the point with the skirmish in the woods, I mean, if I were McLaws and I come across that, I'd be like, okay, well, the jig is up. Like, something's going on. It's right there. That's where I need to go. And it throws a wrench in the gears.
Right.
Yeah.
Go
ahead.
Sorry. There is more evidence. We were talking about the JFK stuff, and I think that, so I'll use that as it. But there is some evidence, not a ton, but there is some other evidence other than just placing in time and place. There is an account from a soldier from the South Carolina Regiment in McLaws division. Thank you. That says we heard some shooting and we stopped, and then we sat around for a while and we were we kind of got out of line, and then eventually we were put back into line and we countermarched.
Right.
So the at least the little bit of common soldier accounts we have of that supports that they stopped because of the shooting.
Well, it would be irresponsible of them to not, right? And I think like a lot of the big deal that's been made over the countermarch is from people who are still, and by still I mean today or 1950 or whenever, they're still sore that the South lost. They're looking for someone to blame. and imaginary ways that the South could have won the Battle of Gettysburg and thus the war. Yeah. Which, even if they won the Battle of Gettysburg, I still don't think they would have won the war.
That's definitely that's a good campfire and cigar debate.
It really is.
But no, I think there's a lot of validity to that. Again, you could. It's a big what if, so I won't weigh in on. But there's definitely good arguments for that. But that gets into the historiography, and this is really what this is.
But the reason I said that was because in any other situation, it would be if they had not stopped at the sound of the shooting and then just got torn to bits, then the problem would have been they didn't stop when they should have stopped. Exactly. So in other words, you can't win for losing. Like there's nothing they could have done that would have been right, but it is right. You've got to protect your column. Right. So you're going to stop when you hear firing. And
should have gone to the right.
I don't know. To me, it's fun to talk about this stuff, but at the end of the day, the result's still the same. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what happened. It doesn't matter who saw what, where, when, who did what, and how far this reconnaissance went.
Right.
This is what happened.
And I think I was actually just talking about this the other day with somebody about, to me, if you wanted to boil down the Battle of Gettysburg, it's very convenient to say, here's the reason we lost, or here's the reason they lost, depending on where you live. Right. But this is life. This is not. I mean, this goes back into the memory, but without getting into it, we humans latch on to narratives.
Yeah.
That's why. That's why you see the movie first. You go and then you go, oh wow, this is cool. This is a good story.
Let's fill in the blanks.
That's why you have a narrative style. That's why things are told in stories, and myths are told in stories. So that. So people latch on to these narratives, and it's very easy for the narrative to say this is the one reason. That's why you have it's Ewell. If he had just taken Cemetery Hill and Jackson was there, we would have won. If we had just done this, we would have won. If we listened to Longstreet, we would have won. All of this stuff, but that's not how things play out. That's how we remember it as an easy to remember narrative, but it's not how it plays out. Right. It plays out in all different places. And so the story of the Battle of Gettysburg, to me, for the Confederates, is entropy. Things tend towards disorder and chaos, and without a strong guiding hand and usually a bit of luck, a lot of luck,
yeah.
That's the way it goes. So it's kind of like the inverse of one of my favorite guilty pleasure movies, National Treasure.
Oh yeah.
It's
a great one.
Yeah, they're sitting in the library and it says, Edison only had to come up with one way to make a light bulb. He found 2,500 ways to fail.
Yeah,
it's the opposite.
Yeah.
There's 2,500 ways to fail here. There's one way for this to go right.
Right.
And
they didn't choose it.
And I'll even say that I think they picked a good plan. It's
sure.
Just that life gets in the way. You don't know that Berdan is going to come right where you want it to be, right at the time you want it to be there.
Sure, yeah,
and it's not Longstreet's guys that prompts Berdan to go out there, or the signal station seeing Longstreet, or the Countermore, or anything like that. It's Anderson and all of the Third Corps movements that prompt Sickles to send people out there.
Yeah,
and so it has nothing to do with the First Corps.
Yeah.
This is a little off topic of the question, but the First Corps is actually, if I had to say one thing where I'm sort of defending somebody, I think the First Corps does as much right as it can do up to that point. It's in reserve, 2 miles away from the front line. How much closer you're going to get?
Right.
There's no evidence that Lee told Longstreet, get here so you can attack at dawn. I mean, that has been pretty much thoroughly debunked.
Yeah.
I do it again here, but the plan does not involve Longstreet when Longstreet leaves at 8:00 at night. And there's no messenger sent back to Longstreet to indicate that he's involved. He's supposed to come up and be in reserve, so that way when they do this pincer movement, they have Longstreet, the old war horse, can exploit any opportunities. That does not change until 4 a.m., and we don't know what the new plan is at 4 a.m. We just know that's not the plan anymore. Right. The plan does not solidify probably until between 10 and 11 a.m.
Right. He doesn't get his orders till 11, Longstreet.
Yeah, it's somewhere around that.
And then he asked to wait for Law, because he's already down a third of his force, so he's like, can I at least wait for this other brigade? And Lee says, yes.
And actually on that point, that's that's definitely the history, but there's really no contemporary evidence that he asks or has to ask, or that's even that's another one of those things that it could be. I didn't jump into this in depth, so I'm not going to weigh in and make a stand on that hill. But there's an open question to me, anyways, as to whether that actually happens or is another one of those defensive things like the countermarch and the recon, which is, well, what took you so long? We had to wait. We could have gone there. We had to wait for law. So, well, why'd you have to wait for law? So I think that's more of a defense part of it.
I don't know actually where. Mike, do you know where that comes from?
It's definitely a post-war account. It's none of the contemporary official records really, not even Longstreet's report really tells you anything about, well, I had to wait for law before I moved. That was, again, because I think you have to read Allen's book. It's very good. But
Thank you, Mike. I agree.
One of the major things is you have to look at Longstreet and why is he writing what he's writing after the war. And you see a lot of that emerge because of him being defensive about people coming at him. And Allen does a very good job of pointing out in the very beginning of the book why Longstreet is being attacked, why Longstreet's being accused. And it's necessary to understand that lens of seeing now what does Longstreet write about this. Okay. And that's one of those reasons. That's one of those stories that pops up because of that.
Thank you, Michael. Now, we started before talking about the route that Johnston took, or not so much the route, but the route, and that his reconnaissance didn't exactly start at 4 a.m. He left at 4 a.m. Right?
Yeah,
and then we got sidetracked.
Like Johnston, it's a very good.
Exactly. I let us get sidetracked to illustrate the point. No, so. Where does he go? Because he stops where? At AP Hill's headquarters, right?
Near there, yeah. He either goes to the headquarters and then him and Long go up and meet Pendleton on
Armistead Long you're talking about.
Yeah. Armistead Lindsay Long. So sometimes I call him Armistead Long. Sometimes it's Lindsay Long. It's just
Lindsay.
So he they all go up. They meet with Pendleton on Seminary Ridge. I place them around McMillan's Hill, and I think I call it the Sunrise Survey. We got to have catchy names for stuff.
Of course.
And they call it I think it's Pendleton that says, if not those exact words, close enough that's where I picked it up. So they say it's around sunrise. They do a survey on the hill. Long says that he got to Hill's headquarters about sunrise. Everybody remembers doing something near Hill's headquarters, surveying the field about sunrise.
Right.
So these all mesh together. And if Long is leaving Lee's headquarters to go to Hill about 4 a.m. and he gets there around sunrise. And Johnston mentions in his letters, I left headquarters around dawn and, talks about, just before sunrise. Pendleton says we did with Walker and Lindsay Long and Johnston, we did a survey at Seminary Ridge close to the end of the line, which is at that point at dawn and at sunrise, that's about the end of the line. Anderson hasn't filled in, further south yet. That all places you around McMillan's Hill down to the Point of Woods, the Virginia Monument.
Right.
And so,
not very far from from Lee's headquarters.
Right. Yeah. It's not a long distance, but it's to ride slowly on horseback and stop and do the painting point out and to do all the there's and to kind of fill everybody in and move up and down the ridge that you could easily spend a half an hour.
Sure.
I mean, and that's not even an
well, and you also don't have West Confederate Avenue to travel on either.
Right. Exactly.
I don't know. There must have been some lanes available to him, but it's not as easy as it is today.
And you have wood lines, and you have at that point, they're sort of starting to fill in that line south. It's extended to, you have a couple of accounts, the skirmishers kind of bending back, and they talk about how it's misty and we're nervous, and there might be some cavalry nearby. And there is, because Pendleton talks about running into cavalry.
Right.
It gets to be this really dramatic story later on about how his aide captured cavalrymen, and there's, he's holding them off with a fake gun under his coat, and he gives this really dramatic story about it. But there are accounts rather of captured cavalrymen on July 2nd, and that makes sense that's where it would have happened. So there are these things that all mesh together, like I said. And so he's up on Seminary Ridge. They're going up and down maybe a half hour or so, and then they break. Long goes back to help Pendleton's guys place artillery, and then eventually goes back towards headquarters. Pendleton goes off on his own reconnaissance, which goes down by the Ravine Road, Willoughby Run Road, back that way. That's where he captures or his aides at least go on that route. Whether he does, whenever you read Pendleton and he says it's a good idea to read me or my aides.
It's like, yeah.
It's not necessarily he physically went down that way. But somebody representing him went that way. So they do a reconnaissance, probably down near Pitzer's Woods. They don't get quite to the woods because he mentions how the woods we couldn't get to earlier are now cleared after the skirmish, and we went back up there. So he's not down that far. And then Johnston does his reconnaissance. And
now, so Point of Woods, right? Then he leaves Pendleton's company, right?
Somewhere between Point of Woods and McMillan's Hill.
McMillan's Hill, where the McMillan house is.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. And then where does he go?
So he can go a couple of different places. Obviously, this is talked about for a long time. Yeah. Where I think he went, he roughly follows Longstreet's path. Now,
the one that he will take
eventually after the countermarch. And again, there's a lot of misconception there, and you have to place. It's one of those where you got to start here, then you got to go to the end, and then you got to remember he's got to come back, and you got to look at it from his perspective. So we know where Longstreet goes, and we know the whole story and everything. But Johnston, I don't think, goes with McLaws, so he doesn't go down the Black Horse Tavern Road and do all of that.
Right.
He's only with Longstreet's corps on the Willoughby Run Road or Ravine Road part of it. And so for his perspective, when he says where Longstreet went, that's where Longstreet went. He went down the Ravine Road. And that is where he went eventually. And so I think he follows that roughly. He may even be with Pendleton for a small portion of that, but I think he follows the backside of Seminary Ridge, the west side. He follows that down. He's either going through the woods in and out of them. There are trails and farm lanes he can follow. I think he eventually gets to roughly the point where South Confederate Avenue, crosses over the Emmitsburg Road.
You're saying, you think Johnston got that far?
Yeah, okay. About that. And I think he takes the Slider farm lane. It could be the Bushman farm, that it doesn't matter immensely.
Right.
Fun conversation, but it doesn't really affect anything. But I think he takes the Slider farm lane. He talks about going down a road directly toward the Round Tops. And if you are where he supposedly is, there's the Slider farm lane you see first, and you go directly to the Round Tops. And that will lead you to the base of the Round Tops.
Yeah.
And then he talks about getting on the slopes of Round Top and having a commanding view. And that's about as much detail as he gets into as far as where on which Round Top he gets to.
So, I mean, because he's got to go that far south, because Buford's cavalry is out on the Emmitsburg Road. So he's got to get around them.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And there's not a whole division of cavalry sitting there in the Peach Orchard, because they're dispersed all over the place. But there is a base there, if you will, and they're up and down. He mentions the cavalry.
Because they're running little patrols out the Millerstown Road. Right?
Oh, yeah, they're all over the place.
So, I mean, that's risky, that move, even if it's just him and one other guy.
Yeah.
That's a risky move.
Oh, it is. And he's used to that. I mean, he's at Chancellorsville, he's shot at by infantry and artillery. He's up in a tree, and they start, at least according to his stories, he's shot at by an artillery piece that spots him in the woods or in the tree. And it's almost like that scene from Private Ryan, except it ends better for Johnston, where they're in the bell tower and they see the tank pointing. Like, uh-oh.
Yeah.
And so he's like climbing down the tree, and he stops when he sees it point and it goes like over his head. He's like, all right, I'm out of here.
Yeah, right.
And at least according to his story,
Feet don't fail me now.
And so, he's shot at, he's in the trenches at Malvern Hill to find out that they've gone. So that's what he's used to. That's why he's kind of picked for the job. And so, but it is dangerous, and nobody knows what's out there. That's why there could be a whole corps on the other side for all they know. That's why he goes out there.
Exactly.
You have this plan. It's actually plan A, but it becomes plan B when plan B fails. So when Yule's not in the position they expect him, then they're rethinking what they're going to do on July 2nd. They decide, well, let's do that whole thing we talked about before with let's tack up the more gentle slope. And so that was initial before Yule talks Lee out of it. That's what they planned initially. So now let's try that. But now we got to know, did anybody come in overnight? Because you can see troops, you can see Sickles coming up in the evening on the Emmetsburg Road. You're not that far away. You can see them. So where did they go? What are they doing? Who else came up? There's other roads that people can take. You have messages from captured couriers that that the 5th Corps is coming in. Where do they go? That you got a couple other corps out there. I lost count how many I counted for. So you have a couple more that you have to account for here. And so you send out your recon guy, your close recon guy, to get right up there in the mix of things to find out if the troops are there and what's the ground look like. Like we know what the maps look like. We've all been out on the ground, but they haven't been on the tour yet.
Right.
They don't know what the ground looks like on the other side. There's only so much you can see from the cupola and everything.
Sure. You don't know the
what's
lay
the
of the
ground
land.
look like, and that's. Interestingly enough, that's what Johnston says part of his job was. He says that I was supposed to get out there to the left, and then when he comes back and you have that whole, I found him on a stump and he had the map, and where he's like, I was tracing my route. He says, and after all the generals left, I sat with Lee and I explained the topography of the ground, So part of it is, what's the ground look like over there? Can you maneuver? Are there... is it swamp? Is there a lake there? Is there? What do we got?
Because you point out in the book that when you're in Pitzer's Woods and you're looking out, you could see the Emmetsburg Road, you could see the Round Tops, but you can't see between the Emmetsburg Road and the Round Tops.
Right.
And you have no idea what that is. Like you say, it could be a lake, could be a swamp. You don't know.
It could be woods. It could be could be wide open.
Could be all of it.
Yeah,
be everything.
And if we've all been down there, it's not easy ground to maneuver.
No.
And everybody that went in that day tells you how horrible it was to maneuver.
Yeah, have you ever tried to just go off the road and walk those fields? Yeah. It's not easy.
No, it's
not. At
all. And so Johnston reports that to Lee. That's part of his report, but which is one of the reasons I think he continued to delay. And Lee says, well, no, should we go this way? And why he gets back roughly 9 o'clock, let's say. That's the reason for the additional 2 hours between the orders and him getting back. Is Lee says, well, if the ground's that bad, maybe we should try the other side. So he goes to Cemetery Hill. And Lee personally goes to that sector. And then he comes back, and that's when he gives the order. So you can you can piece that together. Johnston comes back. Lee's not happy. Presumably because of the way the ground is, because there's no troops down there. At that point, Johnston is right. There's no troops. And that's the other thing back on that assumptions and perception in history is I like to ask people when, given a presentation or something, so who here has read Johnston's report? Nobody is. I say, well, it's because it doesn't exist.
Right.
There is no report to go read, so we have no idea what he told. Not that we don't have any idea, but we don't have any account of what he wrote. We have to make an assumption.
Sure. Right.
And the assumption has always been Lee wouldn't have done what he did if Johnston's report had been accurate. Why would Lee attack there when there's all these troops back there? Well, place the troops on the map. It's 6, 7 o'clock in the morning.
And that's the thing. We've talked about that on when we did this. When we did a Johnston's reconnaissance episode with I believe it was Chris Army.
I think it was. Yeah.
Yeah, and we one of the things that you don't always hear people talk about, which to me is very important, is that there were Union troops on the north slope, at least, of Little Round Top at some point in that morning.
Right.
And I can't remember if we just kind of speculated this or if it's something that everybody agrees upon, that if he got up on Little Round Top, he was probably getting up there just as they were leaving or had just left.
Yeah, and that had always been my and I remember listening to the one with Chris on it.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, and at that time when I was still doing the research on the book, that was my understanding too. Placing him there later, accounting for that half hour to 45 minutes at the Sunrise Survey, bumps him back. So a lot of, and it was actually, this is where constructive criticism is constructive. When the article came out, I was working off that assumption. Okay. And a lot of people said the same thing. Well, you have cavalry, you have this, you have that, you couldn't have had, where are these troops that he says, because part of his account when he talks about the cavalry, almost getting stuck, is there's a large body of troops coming up, just probably the rest of the Third Corps coming up. Well, they're miles away at that point. I said, well, that's a good point. How do we account for that? And I didn't know. And so we started piecing everything together. And then when you get the Sunrise Survey, wait a minute, if they're still 45 minutes of marching, then they're a lot closer, they're, you work at, 3 miles an hour, let's say average marching speed, you're 2 miles closer 45 minutes later.
Yeah.
And so, even I can do 2 miles in 45 minutes, and that's saying something. I'm not loaded down with gear, but you have time to get a lot closer, accounting for those 45 minutes, and that also moves it from 6 o'clock in the morning, where Gary's guys are just getting off the hill, to they're already making the right, Granite Schoolhouse Road,
right,
and so they're already off in the distance, which also comes into play when you see what could he have seen. So if you're Johnston on Little Round Top, and again, why wouldn't you be on Little Round Top? This kind of goes into your
you
JFK
could get there,
stuff,
why not?
There is evidence, here to support that. Well, why not? Let's ask the question, and then the evidence is there when you get there, as opposed to the JFK stuff. Well, what if he did this? Well, he could have, but
he
show
didn't.
me some evidence.
Yeah, right.
Go look for the evidence before you say that's what happened.
Exactly.
The question is great, but you got to go explore.
You got to back it up with something.
And so, if you're Johnston on Little Round Top, one, if there's no troops there, why wouldn't you be up there? And number two, you can see everything you need to see. And what you're going to see at, roughly 7 o'clock in the morning is you're going to see the Second Corps bypassing the Third Corps. So you have the Third Corps in the Trossel Farm, Patterson Farm area, and by their own accounts, they're just kind of hanging out. They're in reserve. They're the rear of the army at that point, waiting to be positioned, and nothing's going on. They're cooking, breakfast and coffee.
Right.
And so that's not really a threat. There's no military position there. Then you look at the Second Corps. The Second Corps is either marching up, passing the Third Corps, so you know that they're not filling in farther south. You can make that assumption. And the troops in the Second Corps that are in position, except for one brigade that's facing west, up in the vicinity of the angle. Again, we're not placing them at the angle at the tour stop, but in that vicinity.
Ziegler's Grove area, somewhere around there.
Ballpark, facing west, the flank. But everybody else is facing towards Cemetery Hill with that orientation.
Right.
So the Second Corps is moving up. You can see, if you can still see Gary's guys marching away, they're making a right at Granite School. They're going off towards Cemetery Hill, Culp's Hill area. The Second Corps in reserve is in formation in columns facing Cemetery Hill. You have, the troops on Cemetery Hill. The rest of the First Corps is coming down and covering the south side of Cemetery Hill. You have one brigade covering the left flank at that point, and then you have Sickles' guys sitting there hanging out in bivouac in reserve. Your assumption at that point can only be Cemetery Hill is their concern.
Right.
So again, we don't have what he wrote, but all of the evidence there is that this is the rear of the army. If you come up around this side and you go up these slopes, this is the rear of the army. And McLaws actually gives us the evidence to support that speculation. So it's not speculation anymore. Now it's at least theory.
Right.
Question.
Go ahead, Michael.
How much of our view of Johnston's reconnaissance is clouded by the eventual fish hook position of the Union Army? how much do we
I was
see?
yes.
How much do we see based on where they eventually end up?
So I was going to say, we know how the lines eventually go, but to Meade and everybody there on the ground, the battle is essentially going to be based on yesterday over Cemetery and Culp's Hill.
Yeah.
Because that's where the flow of everything is heading, right?
Yeah.
Lee is being clever, and he's so, well, let's get around and roll up their flank. And he believes the flank is around where the PA monument is, basically.
Yeah,
roughly.
That is the farthest end of the flank. Yeah, I mean,
right. Because when the sun went down the night before, that's what he could see.
Yeah, and that's what Johnston can report. Because when you start placing the second corps, again, these you're never going to get exact placements. And even when these guys came back later, it was they're 100 feet that way. This is about where we were,
right?
You know, and obviously the monuments are not exact, but
of course.
When you start to place these guys in their rough positions, that's about as far south as it goes in the Second Corps is the Pennsylvania Monument. That's the best marker where you say, hey, about where were these guys? Here, this is it. You have the reserve, and again, those guys that are down there by the monument are not in a line facing left like they are to ward off the second day's actual attack or Pickett's charge. They're just there, and they're in columns oriented north and northeast.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you're looking at that, and when you start placing that on a map, and Phil Lano was kind and patient enough to place people where we're definitely not in the orthodox positions about, when we're talking, because this is kind of the area where we're not really placing troops. We're looking at the battle.
Yeah, we're collecting troops.
And so he was give a lot of credit to Phil for saying, you might want to rethink this. I'll do what you want me to, but you might want to rethink this. So he just wanted to give that little shout out to Phil and thank you for for bearing with me. But they're all faced again towards Cemetery Hill, and so that fishhook, I think there's a lot of the battle that you wouldn't just have to apply this to Johnston's recon or the countermarch, but I'd say a lot of the battle interpretation does play off the fact that
we know
where they end up in that fish, because there is no fishhook at that point.
Right, correct. And there's no plan, let's form a fishhook.
Right.
Like that's all, that's what happens in reaction to events. So, all right. Not only that, but there's so you could come back then, if you are stubborn and you don't want to take our word for it that they didn't know they were going to have a fishhook. Well, why was Buford's cavalry out at the Emmitsburg Road? Because you'd be an idiot not to guard your left flank, right? Exactly. And that's where you would put Buford's cavalry. But it's not to protect the round tops until you get infantry up there. The round tops, they don't really play into anything. I mean,
no, they're another hill.
Right. And we think of the little round top especially as very important because of what ended up happening there.
Right.
But that wasn't anybody's objective. Nobody cared. It's so yeah, I think that you have to remember always when you deal with history, you have to remember what did the principal players know at the time, not what do we know now.
Right.
And that also is the thing that bugs me about the JFK conspiracy stuff. It's like, a lot of stuff now. No.
And it doesn't matter if that information became available 20 minutes later, that doesn't matter.
No, right, exactly.
It's 20 minutes later. I don't know what's going to happen 20 minutes later.
Precisely.
For now, I mean, I have a rough idea of a plan, but I don't know.
Yeah.
And if I learn in 20 minutes, I mean, just and not to get, overly serious for a second, but think about 20 minutes before 9/11 happened. You have no idea that in 20 minutes, me too. It was the apps of the world's going to change, in a lot of different ways. But you don't know that. No. Going to bed the night before, you don't know that.
No, last thing on your mind.
Yeah.
You couldn't imagine that.
And so you can't, you can't know. You have to recreate that intellectual environment as best that you can to determine why people are doing things. And I've found in every time that you try and do that, you get a much better understanding of, and oh, wow, that makes sense.
Right.
I know why that seemed so stupid at the time, but now that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
If I don't know this, and I totally take that out, like you said, a little round top. It is a little round top and is in nobody's plan. The only part of the plan it's in at all is Meade's plan, because that's a pretty solid anchor for your flank.
Yeah.
So get somebody in that vicinity.
Right.
But that's it.
Yeah. But it's not, we must hold that hill no matter what happens this day. You know, it's none of that.
No, not at all. Not until you think that that's the focus. And again, there's misunderstanding in it, not communication, but misunderstanding is if Warren thinks that the Confederate attack is coming towards Little Round Top, because it kind of looks that way, then, oh man, we need troops up here.
Well, that was the other thing I was going to say.
Bypass it.
Well, yeah, exactly. That was the other thing I was going to say is if Hood's line didn't overlap Sickles's line, if Hood's line was lined up directly with the left flank of Ward's brigade, Warren he might have said, well, just in case, let's get something here. But it wouldn't have been such an emergency. But it well overlapped Ward's brigade. And they could easily have gotten up there. And maybe Warren wasn't even thinking of them putting a battery up there and firing up the Union line. Maybe he was just thinking that they would just turn around and swallow up Ward's brigade and roll up Sickles' line. You know, who knows what that. But the point is, once you see that a substantial amount of the enemy's troops can parade right up uncontested, you have to do something.
Right. And even though that wasn't the intention, you don't know that.
You don't know it.
You don't read the book yet.
No.
It's not Spaceballs where you say, well, we have the movie before it's done being filmed. You don't know that.
Preparing to fast forward.
fast forward. But you don't know that. I mean, you just have to assume.
Preparing to fast forward.
Fast forwarding, sir.
Why do you have to? What's all this preparing?
Just go. You learn so much from that.
Oh, God. Mel Brooks is the best. He is a national treasure. Oh, God.
But yeah, you can, back to Little Round Top, you can't know that that's not where their intention is.
No.
And that's not their intention, because that's the controversy. Yeah, I mean, Oates and Law and everything. He's like, why'd you go up that way? Oh, well, because I had to. And okay, well, you sent everybody. So that's never the intention. Even when they get to that point, they just kind of pulled off that way.
Well, yeah, that's a good point too. Is like Oates, they weren't aiming for Big Round Top. They had to go up there because they were pushing back skirmishers. They had to take care of them. So, as I understand it, right, Mike? I mean, is that how you get it too?
Sure.
Okay, thanks, Mike. Thanks for that searing analysis.
But in any event, that's not the objective. Whether it's the sharpshooters or what have you, whatever interpretation you want to take. But their intention is to go, and actually Oates says, I violated orders. I had to go up that way, whether I was right or not.
Well, see, now you just made my point.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He said, I got orders from you to turn to the left and hit the basically Devil's Den. But I didn't, and here's why, but so it's never the objective,
right?
It becomes the objective. It becomes a really important part of the historiography. You got a lot of good writers like Joshua Chamberlain that talk about it, and it becomes important in the historiography. But it's never quite. And militarily, people have hashed this. I'm not going to add anything new to it, but would the Confederates have been able to hold it? Good chance they wouldn't. And
I don't think they would have.
Yeah. And what advantage? I make the argument in the book briefly, but the importance of Little Round Top to the Confederacy, once the day plays out the way it does, is more that the Union Army doesn't have it,
right,
than that they actually have it. So
it's kind of more valuable. I mean, they only have one battery or two batteries on Little Round Top, but still, it's more valuable to the Union Army because they have a much clearer field of fire at the Confederate lines from there.
Right.
Whereas the Confederate, they could have annoyed the Union line with a battery, maybe two.
Right.
But again, I mean, there's so many more Union troops on their way up.
Right.
And the Confederates had nothing to give after that initial wave.
Right.
So, I mean, they had no reserves to put in. So, I don't think, and you always hear people lament that Longstreet didn't let Hood go around to the rod. And I'm always like, it just would have destroyed Hood's division. Yeah. It was the right decision to make.
Yeah. And, that's another one of those things that, what the historiography there, so much of what happens on the second day, especially in the First Corps, there's no contemporary documentation for that. Hood doesn't write a report. McLaws doesn't write a report. Nobody's writing a report. And then on day 3, Pickett writes a report and it disappears.
We don't know where it is.
Yeah. So there's no division reports from the First Corps.
Right.
For Gettysburg at all, whether it's second or third day, it doesn't matter. There's some brigade reports. You have Kershaw, and that's going off of memory here, but that's who I focus on. But that's pretty much it. You got a couple of regimentals, but what else do you have? I mean, there's not everything else is much later. Yes.
Go ahead, Mike. Your mic is open. You don't have to go on the intercom.
Hey. Okay. All right. So a question about that. I mean, you point out that E.P. Alexander was tasked by Longstreet to write the history of the First Corps after the war.
Yeah.
How does the reticence of the officer corps of the First Corps in actually helping Alexander influence how we understand this aspect of Gettysburg?
Oh, I'd say quite a bit. And it's for the first 15 years or so after the battle, at least, there's nothing. I mean, Batchelder, I point this out in the book. Batchelder's basically begging, please give me something. I want to write an accurate account. Give me something. And there is just crickets. And then McLaws, and you can almost see Batchelder pulling his hair out. It's it's like Sisyphus, pushing the rock up, and then oh no, and then pushing it back. Yeah. He's reaching out to McLaws, and McLaws says, "Oh yeah, I'll give you a copy of a report." And then he doesn't have one. We don't know what happened to his report. He may have written one, may have been destroyed in one of the captured wagons or fires or retreat out of Richmond. There's a million things that could have happened.
Sure,
but there's no real indication that he wrote a report in the first place. And so he says, I'll give you my account. I'll give you a report. I'll give you, and he never does. And he says, and Batchelder says, it's been a couple of years. You said you're going to write it. Could you give me that account? He's like, yeah, I'll definitely get you the account. Nothing. So then he gets a hold of Kershaw. This is Batchelder. He finally gets a hold of Kershaw. He starts writing a couple of letters. Those are in the Batchelder papers. They're great letters. That's a big source. That's really the next closest contemporary account we have. That's not McLaws anyways. And he's like, here's what I remember. If you want more info, check out McLaws. I'm sure he'll give you his report. It was like 10 years later, he's like, you can just say, oh my God, and so, but yeah, so he has a real hard time getting accounts from the First Corps. And eventually they start to come out. He gets some, and then the well dries up again. And basically, Kemper basically says it the best. He's like, this is, we're not going to be dragged behind this victorious column as the token Southern account. He references the Roman Gallic Wars and things like that. But he says nobody wants to jump out and be the one person that says it's kind of the like I said, they use I think they use the term like the token account. Essentially, they're not going to be the one Southerner that now I got a Southern account,
right.
Which makes it all true.
Right.
So everybody's just kind of quiet. And why would you want to talk about it?
Yeah,
it's not a very good day for the South.
Yeah.
So nobody really wants to talk about it. And nobody wants to get into the controversy. And so you really only have a couple people talking about it for most of the time. So. That plays a huge role in it. So that's why you only get a couple accounts. And then you have Alexander, who is he's tasked right off the bat. I think it's 1866. There's a letter from Longstreet saying, hey Ed, let's get that First Corps account going. That First Corps. So he actually does. He starts sending letters out to everybody. He's got there's a it didn't copy as well as I was hoping, but there's a copy of the one of these template info sheets that he sends out to everybody he can find. He says, return to me at South Carolina University or wherever he's at. And it's tell me everything that happened. Curiously enough, though, they start with the 7 days. They love the 7 days.
Yeah.
Why wouldn't, if you're a Confederate, why wouldn't you love the 7 days?
Good 7 days.
Yeah, that's a heck of a week. But nobody returns anything. And if he gets anything, it's real hard to get anybody to say anything. And then when he does, Alexander's the kind of the lightning rod there for he's the source for consolidation for all these accounts. So like we talked about before, that memory bucket, all of those other accounts from everybody else that's giving accounts is all sticking to Alexander's memory.
Mm-hmm.
And so he's a great analyst. If you want an overview of how the Army of Northern Virginia worked and decisions were made, and in general, he's a great source. If you're looking for a first-person account, he's not a great source because he's spent 40 years pretty much collecting everybody's account, which latches onto his own. And, then he's writing 40 years after the fact.
Mm-hmm.
And so a lot of his accounts, I mean, he has other accounts than just the books that are out. He's got some articles, but again, he's just as susceptible to everybody else as having a poor memory. And really what because he talks about his recon and about the signal flags and about sitting out by Willoughby Run. Where is everybody?
Right. Well, yeah. So that's the other
crickets
thing.
And
I wanted to get to before we end is he gets out there first. He gets out in a position first, and he says at one point, "When just follow my tracks." Right.
That's the story. Yeah.
That's the story. Okay. So I don't want to give it all away. I want people to get the book. So you get it. So I just wanted to ask, you do get into that in the book. So
you
for those of you
closer to the end, but it does get in there.
All right. So that's it. So if you are like always wondering, how come? Because I was this too. Why don't they just go where Alexander went? And so we get into that in the book, and we'll find that out. I don't want to give it away here. I want people to get the book.
Yeah. No, absolutely. It's in the one little I guess teaser I'll give, if you don't want me to say anything, is they might not be following the tracks because the tracks aren't there yet.
Interesting. See,
like a little sound effect like Twilight Zone.
What do I have here? I don't know what I have. Nothing. It's too late now. Now once you start talking about it, it ruins the moment. I don't know. Maybe wait, say it again.
Maybe the reason that they don't follow the tracks is because the tracks aren't there yet.
Is that good?
Yeah, that'll work.
It was either that
You're
or
the professional.
Well, I don't know how professional I am. Could have been this.
All right, well, that's always a good one. That's like an hour and a half later you start hearing that. Maybe what he talks about precipitous heights. Maybe one of his artillerymen fell off the precipitous heights.
Maybe this one? No, that's just a buzzer. That doesn't work. Or how
they
about
had those and they weren't worried about it. It says
precipitous heights makes me think like maybe
all right,
some kind of sexy R&B music. Because precipitous is a big word.
It is. It's
and you said precipitous heights. Isn't that kind of redundant? Isn't a precipice a height?
Yeah, it was more dangerous heights.
Oh, okay.
High heights,
Precarious heights.
Precarious. That would be good. That one. Yeah. I didn't write. I'm quoting Alexander there. So.
Okay.
I'll next time I see him, I'll tell him.
Yeah, please do.
Yeah.
All right. So let me do this here because I've been hearing a lot. I mean, this book you said came out in June, right? Yeah. So I mean, it's been Mike. I remember you were raving about it when you finished reading it.
Oh yeah.
I've heard from various other people throughout the course of the last 6 months about how much they love this book and how your approach to it is refreshing and new. I think we're living in a very exciting time for Gettysburg history because the new wave of historians are looking at things differently. How many more general overviews can we do of the battle, right? And who's going to add anything to that hasn't been done already? So you have to do these micro histories.
Yeah.
And I think though, when you read these books, or even if you just read like I had to do to prepare for this, a chapter, the introduction and the chapter. Actually, it wasn't even the full chapter; it was just part of the chapter.
Yeah.
You realize that there's so much more to the story that these general histories could never cover. We alluded to that before.
That's what's so interesting about jumping into this.
Yeah.
Wow, I didn't even know any of this.
There's so much to it, which makes sense when you think about it, because there should be so much to it, because that's the way life is. You got 150,000 soldiers here. You have at least that many stories. There's so much to moving a corps. And so this countermarch is, But how many times have there been marches and counter marches and flanking marches that in battles where we don't really care?
It wasn't a big deal.
It wasn't a big
deal.
deal.
It was just another day of the office.
But because we have to figure out why it's not Robert E. Lee's fault that he lost the Battle of Gettysburg, or we have to figure out that it has to be anything other than Meade and the Union Army won the Battle of Gettysburg.
No.
This countermarch is suddenly important.
And Early gets into that in his early speeches. It's like there was absolutely no way that the Union Army beat Lee, so he had to come in. He does a whole litany of historic commanders that Lee is better than, and so Grant was not anywhere in that list. So how the heck did he lose? Well, obviously, couldn't have been any of the dead guys.
He was failed by one of his.
Yep.
Yeah, it can't be any of the dead guys, right? Can't be Stewart.
Jackson.
Nope. Well, it's definitely Jackson. It's his fault for dying.
That's very true. It's Dr. McGuire. What are you doing?
Come on. It's Dr. McGuire's fault for not saving Jackson. All right, let me give you some of the comments here, and I hope these are encouraging for you.
Yeah, just the good ones.
Only the good ones. I'll keep the bad ones to myself. No, there's no bad ones. Ron Moore says, looks like I've found my next Gettysburg book to add to the library. He actually wrote library, but I like to mispronounce it.
It's fun.
King John Weir says, does the signal station... Oh, I asked you that question, Jack's Mountain. Let's see here. Tom Malone says, I really like Alan's pragmatic approach to the, quote, evidence, perhaps as a fellow lawyer. Just ordered this bad boy online and can't wait to read it. Dolls Are Evil says, sup. Love the book. So that's somebody who read it. Roll Tide, great info. Glad I'm a patron of this fine content. Well, thank you, Roll Tide. Kevin says, I ordered this book through For the Historian online. Hope I received my discount. Yes, I hope you told them that you heard about him on Josie Gettysburg. You get 20% off. King John Weir says, great show, Matt. One of Addressing Gettysburg's finest. Thank you very much. Can't wait to read this book. Hope to find it at For the Historian and use my AG discount. Well, there you go. That's nice, too, right there. Tom says, agree, this is one of the best shows. Okay, thank you very much. Debbie says, adds book to the to-be-read list. Very good, Debbie. So apparently there's 7 copies listed on the website for the Historian 10 minutes ago, whenever that was written. I don't know. I don't have a timestamp there, so hurry up and order them now. Like I said, I got the last copy that was on the shelf. They might have some in the back. I'm not sure. Robert Craig says, just bought my copy. Can't wait to read it. Great interview. Thank you, Robert.
Excellent.
Well, there you go. So a lot of people very excited about this book. And I do too. I like the way, so I had a really busy last 7 days. And the 7 days before that were normal busy, but I haven't had a day off. Tomorrow's my first day off in all that time, and in 2 weeks. And so last night I was reading the book and taking notes, and this is not a commentary on the book, ladies and gentlemen, but I started going cross-eyed and dozing off because when I read, I tend to do that. And I was exhausted. And so I said to my girlfriend when we broke for dinner, I said, listen, I need you to read to me. And she's like, what do you mean? And I go, I can't keep my eyes open.
Yeah, that happens to me frequently.
Yeah, and I'm like, I'm going to sit there and take notes and you read to me. And she's like, okay. So after dinner, we sit on the couch and she starts reading to me. And she has a very relaxing voice. And so I'm like, no, this kid. So I had to get off the couch and sit on a wooden chair just so that I wouldn't get comfortable and fall asleep. But I was fascinated by it because, again, it's like new evidence in a mystery. There's more detail. And just the fact that the way you put everything together and you gathered all these sources and you know, like a lawyer or a detective would do, you make a timeline based on all these things and you see what meshes and what doesn't and everything. So I think that's why people are really liking this book so far, because it's a different approach. It's a lawyer's approach as opposed to a historian's approach. And they're very similar, but they're also not.
Right.
And so I think this is going to be one of the books that I actually make a point to try to finish. It might take me 5 years, but I'm gonna try to finish it.
No, and I appreciate it. And and just real quick, thanks to everybody who said that you bought the book. I really appreciate it. But that was one of the things you mentioned about lawyer versus historian. Again, I was a history undergrad, and I had the legal training, and the first couple of years doing the federal litigation, when you write a legal brief, you can't do it in the history field. You can do these string cites at the end of like a paragraph or sometimes even a chapter. You can say, okay, here's where I got everything. You can't do that in a legal brief.
Mm-hmm.
Literally, when you're writing the fact, and literally as in literally, not use it figuratively.
Right.
But in an actual literal sense, when you write the briefs and you write the fact section where you have to tell a judge, especially in like an appeals case, you write all of the facts, and each fact has to have a citation to the record or an exhibit or something. And then each point of law, when you make your argument, obviously you're making the argument based on what you've already presented. But you have to present everything first, and each of the legal doctrines that you're using or the cases that you're using to support your argument later down the road has to be cited after each sentence. So each sentence has a citation. And so I kind of took that approach, partially just because of what I knew, and partially because I knew that this was not the orthodox approach. And, obviously we can talk about interpretations. That's what makes it fun. But I didn't want anybody to say, oh, well, he just made that up.
Right.
Or where'd you find that? Or who said that? Or nobody, so I wanted, and a couple of quick points. One, if you want to know the sources we use, there are, I think, right around 1,000 citations. Obviously, each one's not its own source, but you can go to my website's AllenRThompson.com, and it's ALLEN. And there's a virtual bibliography online. So to the extent that these things are available online, you can click on it, you can go to it, you can see it yourself.
So they don't even need to buy the book for the bibliography. They just go to your website, but you should buy the book.
Yeah. You go put it together, have fun with it. I had a blast. So,
I see you used Tim Smith's Farms at Gettysburg there, our buddy Tim Smith.
I did.
He got into bibliography.
Yep, there's a great photo of Breams Hill that's from the book too, and the Park Service was nice enough to let me use the photo. It's a great photo of Breams Hill and the crossing of the Fairfield Pike, where you can just picture Kershaw's guy. I don't know what page it's on, but
anyway, go ahead, Mike. You got a question?
I would say one of the great aspects of the book is actually the citations, going to the back of the book and reading it. There's a lot of information back there. So when you buy this book, folks, don't just read the contents. Go to the citations. There's a lot there that adds context that's absolutely brilliant.
So wait, you have footnotes and endnotes?
A couple of footnotes.
Yeah.
Most of the footnotes will be, not all of them, but most of them will be like points on the maps, like point 1, 2, 3, 4. There are some that are just quick asides that didn't fit into the narrative. The endnotes, the type that Mike's talking about, are okay. Well, here's some more context, but if we really got into this analysis, it would, one, be like a 600-page book, and two, it would really take away from the narrative flow. Everybody's going to like different types of writing styles, but one of the goals was to make it at least accessible to people that weren't just, it wasn't
super
Coddington.
Nerds. Yeah.
Which is great info, and everybody that's serious about the battle should read it, but, is not, it doesn't read like a narrative.
But the footnotes are, you use Roman numerals, which throws me off.
Yeah.
Because I forget them.
That was actually, I had formatted it in Word, and I sent it over to the publisher, and they just kind of used what I sent them. They were very good about however I wanted it formatted and done and
That's
broken
good.
up. And the photos I wanted, they basically, I put the cover together, sent it over. The title I sent over, everything was basically, it was almost like, with Amazon, you format and you send it to them. They did work. They put it in the book format, and, but that was all, they were very lenient with how I wanted to do it. So I think they didn't even ask. They just put it, like, okay, they kept the Roman numerals. So,
well, that's good. And I don't know. It's I'm very excited to get into this more, because this is something that, fascinates all of us. It's like one of the great mysteries of the Battle of Gettysburg. And perhaps maybe you have solved it for us, or you can help someone solve it with this information.
I hope so. I had fun doing it, whether or not it convinces anybody.
Yeah. So you go to forthehistorian.com and order a copy, or if you're in town, pop in and get a copy of it. And don't forget to use Addressing Gettysburg so that you can get a 20% discount. This is the cover, again, ladies and gentlemen, In the Shadow of the Round Tops by Alan R. Thompson, Alan with an E. Alan, thank you very much for coming on. I really appreciate this.
Thank you.
This is really cool. I love that you did this, and so this is an exciting. Like I said, it's an exciting time for Getty's Nerds with all the different histories that's coming out now, that are coming out now.
No, it definitely is, and thanks for having me. This has been great.
Anytime. If you want to come back and talk about another aspect of it another time, more than welcome to. Just let me know.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Okay? Be happy to.
All right, folks, thank you very much. Mike, thank you for your assistance in the back there. And that's it. We'll talk to you next time. All right, very good. Thank you, everybody, for watching. Let's see, right, Matt. I've read Civil War books for over 30 years, and just by Alan's presentation here, I decided that he has first-rate history writing instincts that convinced me to buy immediately.
Well,
there you go, Alan. Good for you.
I appreciate it.
Good for you. See, you go out on a limb and you do something different, and it pays off, right?
Sometimes you fall into the stream and get eaten by the alligator, and sometimes sometimes you see something that you didn't see before.
Yeah, no, this is great. Oh, that's good. All right, cool. All right, I got to eat lunch. I'm starving. I didn't have breakfast.
Me too. I had a little like power bar type thing way up here.
I didn't even have that. Mike, you know how to end the stream?
Yep.
All
End
right.
stream.